Hi everybody, welcome to this timeline documentary. My name is Dan Snow and here I am in a Lancaster bomber cockpit, one of the few remaining Lancasters from the Second World War, to tell you about my new history channel. It's called History Hit. It's like Netflix for history. Hundreds of history documentaries on there and interviews with many of the world's best historians. Follow the information below this film or just search online for History Hit and make sure you use the code TIMELINE to get a special introductory offer. Now enjoy this show.
In the lead-up to one of the most important years in the Australian War Memorial's history, I'll go behind the scenes to learn how the Great War shaped a young nation and reveal the powerful stories behind the names on the Roll of Honour. In this episode...
Don't be scared to tell them you love them, because you just don't know what's around the corner.
The cost of war.
I don't believe war should be the soul of the nation.
Mourning the dead.
His early death terminated what promised to be an exceptionally brilliant career.
The aftermath of the Great War.
100 years later, the evidence of that firefight is still everywhere.
Yeah.
Wherever you look.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
Saving the winged victory.
We have separation. Well done.
And mission accomplished. The new World War I gallery is completed. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. And here we guard the record, which they themselves made.
Those are the words of historian Charles Bean, the founder of the Australian War Memorial. He landed with the Australian troops at Gallipoli and stayed with them for the duration of the Great War. It was amid the carnage of Posiers in 1916 that the idea for a war memorial first came to him. He wanted somewhere Australians could go to mourn and to remember. But 100 years after the outbreak of that war, has Charles Bean's vision stood the test of time?
As one of the memorial's founding fathers, Charles Bean drew up its guiding principles, stating that the memorial should, at all costs, avoid the glorification of war and the boasting of victory. To fully understand the remarkable legacy Charles Bean left behind, you only have to visit the memorial's research centre.
So this is the Bean collection here that was produced by him and his staff to write the official history.
The endless boxes of notes and documents written by the revered war correspondent are evidence of Charles Bean's superhuman quest to record Australia's involvement in the Great War. Charles Bean felt a heavy responsibility to tell the story of the Australian soldiers at Gallipoli and later on the Western Front, because he feared the Anzacs were likely to be ignored by British historians.
So he's using original records that he's cut and pasted in a very ordered fashion by unit and by date.
So he's very much an ordered mind.
Yes, there's a treasure trove in here, really. So I'll show you one as an example.
For 2 decades, Charles Bean wrote an astonishing 6 volumes of the official history of Australia's involvement in World War I. And he also edited a further 6 volumes, leaving a legacy of 286 notebooks and diaries.
It's just amazing to me that in the midst of that maelstrom of all that was going on, that Bean almost selects himself or emerges as somehow the right mind, the right meticulous diarist and archivist in his own right. That he ensured that the record was kept. If he'd been anybody else, so much could have been lost.
Yeah, I think Australia's view of the First World War has a lot of Bean legacy in it. And also even our historiography, the way he wrote the official history was about officers and ordinary soldiers and their part they played. And that affected how Australians wrote history later on too. So he was a very unusual person, the right man in the right place, I suppose.
It's been nearly 30 years since all the boxes containing Charles Bean's original diaries have been removed from this locked room.
First of many. This is actually the one he took with him to the landing on the 25th of April.
Really? That was with him there? So these were notes made very soon thereafter?
So he's writing in the dark. So at some point he puts in the margin, if I'm plugged, people probably think I'm unsettled. Plugged in means shot. I'm unsettled or unnerved.
The fact was it was written by night when no candles were to be had, and I had to do as best I could in the moonlight. On some nights the sky was clear and could see fairly well. On others I simply had to place the lines by guesswork, and many of them are written over one another. If you wanted to get into the mind of somebody who saw the landing at Gallipoli, that's it there. That's the landing at Gallipoli as it's seen, as it's understood by one man. And how perfect is it as well that he has overwritten himself, because that's the confusion, and that's almost literally the fog of war. He's writing and then he can't see what he's written and he's just overwriting and overwriting, and so the truth gets lost in that confusion. It's actually happening on the page. Everything about the First World War is overwhelming. So I suppose it's no surprise in that context that Charles Bean's collected diaries and notebooks about the First World War are similarly overwhelming. But then when you think about what he's writing about and when he's writing about, the 4 years of the war, of course it had to be an overwhelming collection, because you could never write enough, see enough, you could never get enough testament. And the other thing it makes you think about, the way these diaries are being looked after, they're almost becoming precious, like gospel or scripture. And when you think about, you know, the Gospels being written 2,000 years ago, they start with one man noticing something important taking place and seeing fit to make a note of it so that people don't forget. And ultimately, it's not the books and the words that matter, it's the deeds. And at least in these collected diaries, we've got a sense of who they were and what they did.
It wasn't until Charles Bean witnessed the carnage on the Western Front that he began to conceive of a memorial that would not only commemorate those who had been killed, but would also be a museum featuring battle relics.
Is it the case that Bean's vision of a memorial like this was inspired by witnessing the Australian soldiers' tendency to collect souvenirs and trophies from the field?
Yeah, I think you've got something there. I mean, the very word souvenir became very common among Australians, and it's a new word invented during the war, soldiers souveniring, and Australian soldiers were notoriously good at it. He formed the view that these relics properly displayed could give people a sense of what had happened.
Just fairly steady over these so it doesn't bounce around too much.
Following in the tradition of Bean's vision, the memorial is currently preparing artefacts to go on exhibition in the new $32 million redevelopment of the First World War Gallery.
Okay.
Yeah, looks good.
most meticulous work involves the restoration of the memorial's historic dioramas.
Nick, are you a patient man by nature?
I am, I think, yeah. I'm blessed in that way.
Seems like the most painstaking job imaginable.
Yeah, it's taking a while.
The idea for the dioramas came from discussions during the First World War between Charles Bean and a group of war artists. Bean saw the dioramas as a graphic way of helping Australians to understand the battlefields.
What was once just a vision for the World War I gallery is gradually becoming a reality. The challenge for the memorials team was to tell the epic story of the Great War in such a way that it reflected not only victory, but also the catastrophic cost, including the deaths of over 60,000 men. So many lives cut short, so much potential snuffed out. The Allies had gained victory, but the damage to the nation was almost unbearable. Now, where do you find a single artefact, an object that sums all of that up, that says, here is victory, but in the shadow of loss?
In a Sydney Council depot, bolted to the ground near a dog kennel, the winged Victory waits to be saved. Even in these humble surrounds, there are glimpses of the magnificent icon she once was. Created in the image of the figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, she holds the laurel wreath of peace in one hand and a raised sword in the other. Her downturned eyes reflect the ultimate sacrifice made by the soldiers she once watched over. The Winged Victory's original home was near the Marrickville Town Hall in Sydney. Today, the ghostly reminder of where she once reigned is the memorial bearing the faded names of the 458 Marrickville soldiers who lost their lives in the Great War. Designed by Marrickville sculptor Gilbert Doble in 1919, she was the largest bronze casting ever placed on a war memorial in Australia.
The detail in the wings especially is just exquisite, just absolutely.
The memorial's head of the National Collection, Tim Sullivan, is looking forward to the 95-year-old statue being the central focus of the new gallery.
She represents not just the notion of victory, but also the way in which that one community in Marrickville sought to remember.
Well, it's one of the most grand of those memorials that were created around the country at the end of the First World War. There are very few examples like this which are as grand, which are evidence of a commitment by a community to say this was important, this was significant to us, and we have to make sure it's remembered.
During her heyday, the Winged Victory gave solace to a district still scarred by war. In 1962, due to lightning strikes, she was removed because her metal base was so worn she was threatening to fall, so the grand old lady was forgotten and stored away, only to be restored in 1988, but later taken down in 2009, again due to public safety concerns. Sadly, her ongoing restoration had become an expensive undertaking the Marrickville Council could no longer afford. On a bright sunny morning, the Winged Victory is on the brink of leaving obscurity behind. As the team prepared to release the old statue, there is much concern about her fragile condition. The man who now carries the weighty responsibility of her care is conservator Julian Bickersteth.
The key to moving her, obviously, is not to stress the areas in terms of the outliers, like this hand wreath. The other area of concern is the cross, and from this side you can clearly see how the central iron core is corroding away on the cross, and so we're going to support that as well.
We're going to miss you.
The depot's workers bid a fond farewell to the lady who has graced their yard for nearly 6 years.
Not really sad, because it's going to a good place, so it'll be good. We'll come and visit it.
Thank you.
the much-loved winged Victory is set free.
Yeah, the sword's all right. I'm happy with that.
As she makes her way through the city streets, the next step for the winged Victory will be a major facelift before she can finally make her way to Canberra to be displayed in the memorial. But there's one catch. She'll need to have her legs amputated. During the past 12 months, the memorials team has been busy preparing to commemorate the centenary of Australia's involvement in the Great War.
Catch you later.
The work never stops, particularly when seen through the eyes of Communications Coordinator Dennis Stockman.
So we generate all the media for all the events and exhibitions and anniversaries and ceremonies we have here at the memorial, so we get as much media attention as we can.
And I have great pleasure in launching Australia and the Vietnam War.
I reckon we've had over 10 book launches so far this year. And this one we're at our most frantic, right? Even we had Peter Cosgrove come just before he turned Governor-General to launch the official history of Vietnam. This one is hectic. We have morning tea set up, event space ready, media invited, are the right guests coming along. This is when things are really busy at the memorial. A while ago we had the Animals in War Day, which was great. And we had pigeons, working dogs, families, children. They all came in with their own pets as well to celebrate, I suppose, what animals have done for us in war. I was extremely honoured when the Belgian buglers came to perform the last post at our close-in. We never have a boring day. I've been here for almost 8 years now. I think they're never going to lose me from the memorial because I love the place so much. I think they'll have to get me out the crowbar. Yeah, it's a beautiful place.
On the Roll of Honour, the names of the fallen are recorded on bronze plaques. The individual truths here are largely forgotten, simply because no one witnessed the valiant act, or no one survived to write it down and pass it to the coming generations. That can seem unfair, a bit sad, but with the passage of time, surprises come back into the light.
Hey, Cameron, what have we got today?
Every year, the Memorials Collections team assess thousands of items that have been sent to them by the public. But rarely does one donation attract so much attention.
So, Neil, we've got this new donation that came in.
The people just turn up at the door with...
They contacted the War Memorial a few days before arriving to say that they've got some medals relating to a DCM winner, Distinguished Conduct Medal, second only to the Victoria Cross for an enlisted man. When it first came in, we thought it was just another donation of medals and letters, which we were very excited about. But then when we spoke to the donor, they told us about how his mother is actually an Indigenous Australian.
Right.
So this is a very significant donation. Yes, so as soon as it came in, I told our Indigenous liaison officer, Gary, and he came down to have a look at it, and to say he was excited was an understatement.
Oh, hello, Sheila. It's Gary Oakley from the War Memorial.
Oh, hi, Gary. How are you?
I'm good, and very excited, actually.
Gary.
I bolted down the stairs to have a look, and you get down there and go, oh my God, because we only had one single medal for an Aboriginal soldier in the First World War in a collection from a broken medal group. He was a military medal winner, but we don't know where his medals were. So, I mean, for us at the War Memorial collection-wise, it was a huge donation, and it's the only known DCM to an Indigenous Australian in any collection. Mm-hmm. And colour didn't come into it at the time. You know, he was a Lewis gunner. His job was to go forward and, you know, cover his troops. He went forward and he was shooting up machine gun nests and things like that. I mean, he was exposing himself all the time. And he was being seen for being a good soldier, you know. So the DCM, you know, I mean, he got that because he was good at his job.
According to Richard Kirby's war service record, he signed up in 1915 and survived Gallipoli before serving on the Western Front. His records briefly state he was mortally injured by gunshot wounds to the head. He was only 27. As the memorial plans to display Richard Kirby's Distinguished Conduct Medal in its new First World War gallery, the curators are eager to obtain a photograph of the young soldier.
The family member that brought the medals in went, oh, I'll go back and talk to the old aunties, the old ladies who run everything, and we have a trunk. So we all went, oh, the trunk, you know, and they said there's other family goodies in the trunk and other stuff. So
Goodness.
It's a road trip time, I guess. We don't normally do road trips.
Gary Oakley and registration officer Eleanor Cave hit the road to travel to Warren, near Dubbo, in western New South Wales.
I don't know what to expect from these people. I mean, what we've seen so far is pretty excellent. You know, who knows?
The whole family is turning up to see us, as far as I can tell.
In a few hours' time, they'll know if Richard Kirby's descendants have any further treasures that could be included in the memorial's national collection. Meanwhile, I've been following the restoration of Marrickville's much-loved Winged Victory. The 95-year-old Winged Victory statue has had a tumultuous life. Since the Marrickville Council transferred ownership to the memorial, her restoration has been under the expert eye of Sydney-based conservator Julian Bickersteth. But there's one catch. She'll need to have her legs amputated. Julian.
Neil.
How are you?
Good. Welcome to Winged Victory.
How bizarre.
In all her glory.
Yeah, sawing a lady in half.
Yes, not something we do very often or need to do very often, but it's happening.
Gosh, it's quite brutal, isn't it?
It is. Essentially, we've got a 1920 sculpture by Gilbert Doble here, with a bottom half that's basically disintegrated. You'll see she's got a sword off the top, and that proved to be a lightning rod. And the lightning and various storms caused a lot of damage to her, and she was taken down in the 60s and restored in the 80s.
So the legs were not part of the original sculpture?
They weren't, that's correct.
She had another pair of legs in those days?
She did. She had rather more slender, and so when she was put on the new legs, they were made rather more robust as well.
Oh, right, so she went from a kind of a size 10 to a size 16?
In thigh size, I think that's correct.
Right,
yes,
okay.
indeed.
Basically, everything that's been done to her in more modern times is being taken away to leave behind just the original.
Correct. At the end of the day, it's just not robust enough to go back onto the pillar where she originally stood.
So she's not fit to be outdoors in the elements?
No. So that's why we've very carefully worked out a join point here, and it's fantastic you're here to see this great moment when she is half separated.
Well, it's a first for me. Amid all the noise of the angle grinder, there's the danger the fragile Winged Victory won't survive her amputation.
I mean, whatever's in there just breaking away. It feels like, you know, a plaster or something that hasn't set properly.
Let's try some flexing.
You're really careful about that.
About the flexing?
Yep.
Sure.
I'm not saying don't do it,
Yeah.
I'm just saying don't push too hard.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, you can see her flexing. You can see her rising and falling. It's like she's breathing again. It's a tough old girl.
Yep, you're there. You're there. We have separation.
Wow.
Great work, Mac. Well done.
Poor legless.
Yeah.
Legless Vicky.
Now the real work begins.
Yes.
Weeks of restoration work lie ahead for the Winged Victory. Her days in the open air may be over, but a new phase in public life beckons. After 6 hours on the road, the memorial's Indigenous liaison officer Gary Oakley and registration officer Eleanor Cave have finally arrived in Warren to meet the family of First World War soldier Richard Kirby.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hello. Pleased to meet you. Thank
Gary,
you.
lovely
Lovely
to
to meet you.
Thank
Please
you.
come in. I would like to introduce you to my mother and my aunt, Eleanor and Gary.
How do you do?
Richard Kirby's descendants have donated his Distinguished Conduct Medal to the memorial, and now Gary and Eleanor are eager to acquire a photograph of the war hero.
First, I'd like to thank the family for the donation. We have very little Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stuff in our collection, and those 3 medal groups that you donated to us increased our collection by 300%. We didn't have any. And Richard Kirby is a Distinguished Conduct Medal winner. That's probably just under the Victoria Cross. So, I mean, he's a very brave man.
Okay, well, come on in. I'm going to show you the trunk.
The trunk.
Look
the
at
magic
this.
trunk, yeah.
Beautiful old trunk. So this has been in our family for several generations. Yeah? Full of goodies.
Yeah.
So would you like to have a look?
Yes,
I'd love
please.
to have a look.
Okay.
Do you want me to give you a
The top
hand? I'll
comes
take that.
off totally. So here we can start showing you some of the things. So the first thing that's coming out of the box is Richard Norman Kirby.
Ah, right.
So
this is the
this
photo.
is the photo.
The photo.
So this is the photo that hung on my grandma's wall.
At last, Richard Kirby's youthful face is revealed. Also contained in the chest are historic newspaper clippings, a prayer book, and photographs of Kirby's brothers, Robert and George, who also served in the Great War.
Top moustache.
I love these moustaches.
Top moustache.
So good.
Yeah.
So these are the items that your family is happy to donate.
The family are just delighted that you guys took the time to come all this way to do this. So
Yeah. I mean, this
great.
is special.
very.
That's why we're here. Yeah, we don't normally do this.
Yeah, it's great. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
So, and I know my mum and my auntie are really happy to do this.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. I think it means a lot more because
It's a
it
really
means so much to
emotional
the
day.
family.
Yeah.
It's been a really big day for your family.
It has.
Yeah.
Public recognition of Richard Kirby's bravery is particularly important to his family because, like many other Indigenous soldiers, Richard's name was omitted from the local war memorial.
Uncle Dick doesn't appear on this one, and I haven't been able to find him on any of the others in the district.
I've seen this before where they've left off the Indigenous soldiers.
Yes, and I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I've actually seen one where it's got the name, the guy's name, and then they put Aboriginal in brackets afterward.
Okay.
So, I mean, you know, whether it was policy of the day, the town, you know, didn't want people to know that people from the area had enlisted. Yeah. I mean, and things are different today. Times are different.
Of course, yes.
Now's the time to change this because people are really interested. And I mean, I was quite surprised, you know, people are so proud of this man. And they're not Indigenous. So, you know, and it's been 100 years.
100 years, yes.
Several months later, Richard Kirby's Distinguished Conduct Medal is installed in the new gallery.
The Anzac story, the Anzac legend has a black face. People didn't realise that for a long time. Now it's coming out.
From being hidden away in a box in someone's home, he now becomes part of the World War I gallery.
Yeah, but it also becomes part of the nation's story too, and that's the big thing. You know, people have a tendency to think Indigenous Australians didn't do anything. They're all on settlements. They're all somewhere, you know, out of sight. No, they weren't. Yeah.
A man almost forgotten by his country is finally honoured.
Any mention of the First World War tends to make us think about the loss of millions of young men in the prime of life. What's so often overlooked, though, is the damage wrought upon the families they left behind, especially the women. Mothers grieving sons, women grieving sweethearts, wives coping with husbands damaged beyond recognition. All of these emotions are encapsulated in the story of 22-year-old Tom Elliott. The consequences of his death would reverberate down through his family for years to come.
Throughout the past few months, I've been following the restoration of Marrickville's much-loved Winged Victory. She was created in 1919 after the Great War ended, and her sorrowful, haunting face encapsulated the grief of a nation mourning its dead. Today, all that remains of where she once stood is the plinth bearing the names of the 458 Marrickville soldiers who lost their lives in the Great War.
The first time I saw him there, it was very emotional for me to see his name because I'd heard so much about him. Even me, like 2 generations down, and finally there it was, his name.
When the Winged Victory reigned in Marrickville, Deborah Jackson would sometimes visit to reflect on the death of her great-uncle, Major Tom Elliott.
Even though it's got a wider meaning to many other people, I'm sure for me, it's an important part of that heritage of Marrickville.
Tom Elliott was the most sparkling of his generation. He graduated from Duntroon Military College in 1914, and many predicted he was set for a remarkable career. On the memorial's Roll of Honour, Major Tom Elliott is listed among those cut down during the Battle of Fromelles on the Western Front. Tom's mother, Mary Ellen, was tormented by the fact his body was never recovered.
The problem for her was that there were multiple accounts of what happened to him. So there were numerous eyewitness accounts of people who saw his dead body or who saw him killed. But there was one account where somebody said they saw him injured but not dead, and that he was seen to go behind enemy lines. So she then believed that he was alive and believed that somewhere he would be found.
In the fields of Fromelles, almost a century ago, more than 5,500 Australians were killed, wounded or taken prisoner in a single battle, now considered to be the worst day in Australian military history.
On July the 19th, 1916, thousands of Australian and British troops attacked across this level ground and in broad daylight, only to be mown down by German machine guns. By July 20th, this whole area was littered, strewn with the dead and the dying. The wounded were crying out for help that would never come. In all, there were 5,500 Australian casualties, killed, wounded or taken prisoner, and simply missing. And among them was Tom Elliott.
In a bid to understand what happened to Major Tom Elliott, the memorial's historian, Aaron Pegram, has joined me on the Fromelles battlefield.
The attack in which the British launch on the night of the 19th to 20th of July 1916 is a concerted effort to really make enough noise in this sector to make the Germans believe that there is going to be an offensive up here, and that's to prevent their reserves from being drawn down onto the fighting on the Somme.
So it was into that massive effort, 40,000 men on either side, the machine guns and the rest, that Tom Elliott moves.
That's correct. Tom Elliott is one individual on this massive battlefield, and when this battle kicks off, he's thrown into a virtual maelstrom of German machine gun fire.
So the men are moving forward and the machine guns are either side of them in interlocking fire.
Yeah, that's correct.
The men are just running towards a lead wall.
That's right. It's they're literally running into a wall of lead.
As we walk the battlefield, remnants from the carnage continue to emerge from the earth.
It just never ceases to amaze me. You know, every time you come here, it's 100 years later, and you spend half an hour and look at it.
Yeah.
What must have been littered here on the day the war stopped? And these, but all of it, and even that, just spinning through the air at the speed of sound and red hot, cut your arm off, kill you.
That's right, yeah.
So these may well have come from, if not Tom Elliott's company, then people close by, because these are the bullets being fired into this German position.
That's correct. You know, these are 303 rounds. These are what the Australians and British troops are firing at the German machine gunners that are occupying this position.
And even 100 years later, the evidence of that firefight is still everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable.
That's the donation, and then this is the donor file.
Back at the memorial, Head of Research Robin van Dyke reveals the Red Cross files and letters that have been meticulously archived in relation to Deborah's great-uncle, Tom Elliott. Believing he may have been taken as a prisoner of war, the files reveal the heartbreaking lengths Tom's mother went to investigate the fate of her son.
Here we are. This was one of the ones I think that really troubled her. On the 19th of July, after I was brought in, I was told by Wrigley that Major Elliott was lying wounded near the first-line German trench, and I expect the Germans took him in and that he is wounded and prisoner. Well, Wrigley said he did not think he was badly wounded.
So this is her looking for answers in 1916, not long after the battle, really.
I cannot get any definite news of what has become of him. The last message I got, they said he was unofficially declared killed in action. Officially, they do not know what has happened to him. If he is alive, please try and find him for me.
It leaves room for doubt, doesn't it? A little bit of hope, but it's pretty tormenting, I suppose.
And look here, she goes, the suspense is dreadful. So she must have just had this, it was just awful, wasn't it?
What do you think happened to Tom Elliott, having read the accounts and studied the battle?
There's a few conflicting eyewitness accounts about what happened to Tom, but there is one particular eyewitness statement from two men, Privates Forbes and Lance Corporal Ollis from the 60th Battalion Light Machine Gun Section. And they're in very close proximity. They're actually going into battle alongside their major. And this is the account. Major Elliott dropped about 80 yards from our line on July 19th at Flaubert. We saw him go down. Shortly afterwards, he stood up and tried to get his tunic off. He got it off rather a little and then pitched forward onto his face. He had a big gash in his back, as from high explosive. He remained there all bunched up with his body in the air and his head on the ground as we went past in our wave.
Where in this vast tabletop do you think that likely happened?
I suspect that Tom Elliott was killed probably about 50 metres in front of us here.
Revered Brigadier General Pompey Elliott was a key figure in Tom's life. Pompey believed the Duntroon graduate was one of the most gifted young officers he had ever served with. Although both men shared the same surname, it's unlikely they were related. Prior to Fromelles, Pompey rapidly promoted Tom to Deputy Commander of the 60th Battalion, an extraordinary achievement at the tender age of 22.
It was from somewhere near here that Brigadier General Pompey Elliott watched the destruction of his troops. When it was all over, he wept openly as he shook hands with the survivors of 15th Brigade. He would later describe the battle as a wretched hybrid scheme, which may well be termed a tactical abortion.
Later, Pompey would write to Tom Elliott's family.
So that was a letter written by Pompey Elliott to the family, yeah.
This was written by Pompey Elliott.
He always thought he had an exceptionally brilliant career ahead of him.
Look at this. His early death thus unfortunately terminated what promised to be an exceptionally brilliant career, and it can be safely said with the utmost regret that this officer's death is the greatest individual loss the brigade has suffered since its formation.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, a lot of potential lost that he recognised.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the cemetery at VC Corner. It was laid out after the armistice and it holds the remains of 410 Australian soldiers. There are no gravestones here, and for one simple reason. The bodies had lain in no man's land for so long that by the time they got round to burying them, not a single body could be identified. And the names of the dead and the missing were placed on these tablets on the back wall. It's highly likely that Tom Elliott is here as well, but we will simply never know for sure.
For Tom's mother, Mary Ellen, the intensity of her grief never faded.
She had become increasingly more distressed. She was, I think, had some sort of mental health symptoms, you know, just with this terrible grief, this grief that she couldn't move beyond. And she died in the Parramatta Asylum, where I think she'd been there for a few weeks before she died.
Because in some ways she died the same day he did.
I think so. She never recovered. I don't believe there's no evidence. Everything we see is a very distressed woman after that. She was just devastated, devastated.
Deborah Jackson hasn't seen the Winged Victory since the statue was removed from the plinth that still bears the name of her great-uncle.
So you're getting a privileged glimpse of the work in progress.
I'm very excited about that and just delighted.
You like?
Oh, she's so beautiful.
Yes.
It's a long time since I've seen her.
And what do you get from... This is almost a bird's eye view. You wouldn't have seen her from this angle unless you had wings yourself.
No, I'd always looked up. I've never looked at her face on. She's absolutely beautiful. I mean, she stood watch over all those boys for so long. It's like she represents all those sad mothers, doesn't she, whose children never came home.
That's the price that was paid for the victory in the end. That's all it is, just a lot of dead men and boys.
Yep, and a lot of sad, sad mothers.
Well, she's the end of the story now.
I can't think of anywhere else in the world that has anything quite like the scale and scope of Australia's War Memorial. Although the building is one of the most beautiful in the world, it's the people of the memorial who make it powerful.
I think there's a lot of, well, there's been a lot of emotion shed in this place over the years. A lot. I think I've coined it once by saying the walls are sort of painted with emotion. As Charles Bean said, that this is a place to reflect, commemorate. It's a big story.
When the memorial's founder, Charles Bean, first imagined a shrine to commemorate the Great War dead, he could never have envisioned the world wars and conflicts that would follow. He wrote, "Whatever these men did, nothing can alter now. The good and the bad, the greatness and the smallness of their story will stand. Whatever glory it contains, nothing will lessen. It rises as it will always rise, above the mists of ages, a monument to great-hearted men, and for their nation, a possession forever."
Give me that. Yep. Just that.
Looking for sword.
Yep. Sometimes. As Prime Minister, amongst the toughest decisions you have to take about sending men to war and the possibility of losing their lives, and so this memorial to those who've made the supreme sacrifice is something that's terribly important.
When I look back on my time as Prime Minister, nothing gripped me more than the responsibility involved in committing young people and sometimes not so young people to fight in defence of Australia.
For some, the memorial is the soul of the Australian nation. But for others, it's a reminder of the lessons of history.
I don't believe war should be the soul of the nation. The way we behave to each other, the way we behave to other people in the human race, defines our soul, defines what we are, who we are. War is the failure of diplomacy. War is a failure of relationships. War is failure.
By far the most solemn task is the placement of a new bronze panel on the Australian War Memorial's Roll of Honour. The names of 2 soldiers have been engraved onto the panel, Corporal Cameron Baird and Corporal James Smith, who were both killed in Afghanistan.
It is my privilege as the Director of the Australian War Memorial to welcome to the memorial 3 extraordinary Australians, Doug and Kay Baird and their son Brendan. The generosity of this family that have given their son, who gave his life for our country, is now that they wish to have Cameron Baird's medal collection, his Victoria Cross, his Medal of Gallantry, displayed here in the Hall of Valour at the Australian War Memorial for all Australians.
And the only other thing too that I'd like to say to the mums and dads that have a serving boy, girl in the Defence Force is, don't be scared to tell them you love them, because you just don't know what's around the corner. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you very much.
What is it like to face families who have lost soldiers?
For me, a profound sense of inadequacy.
What do you say?
What you think you can and what the spirit moves you to say at the time. But I guess the important thing is to be there, and the important thing is to acknowledge that there is this almost unbearable loss that's been suffered.
I've seen the grief and the pain that sits behind these names, and it never ceases to be impressed on me. These 40 names from Afghanistan, I've met most of these families. When you look down that wall, the 40,000 plus names that are on there, just the devastating time that was in Australian history, because I've seen the impact just for these families here. Each of the families and these names is why I do my job. It's as enjoyable as it is to meet some of the very important and powerful people, I guess, that come to this ceremony. This is why I work here.
If, obviously, young people, you know, the next generations coming through go to the Australian War Memorial, what should they take away from a visit, a solitary visit to that place?
Just that I think that the country had depth and that many people thought it was worth fighting for, and that what we had created here was worth defending. And in the defence, they laid down the largest sacrifice of all, their lives. And I think that's what that memorial says.
On the eve of the opening of the First World War Gallery, I wondered what the memorial's founding father, Charles Bean, would think of all this.
Look how far we've come, Paul. It's been 2 years. I can't believe it.
Compared to what it was when we first began, it's actually turned out quite amazing. I think the public, when they walk in here, are going to be gobsmacked. I think it's been a very good outcome. So
it's good night.
Every evening, the memorial holds a last post ceremony And this evening it will pay tribute to Major Tom Elliott. Tom's great-niece, Deborah Jackson, will lay a wreath in his honour.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Major Thomas Patrick Elliott. Tom Elliott was born on the 18th of January 1894 in Marrickville, New South Wales, to Thomas and Mary Elliott. In July 1916, at 5:50 p.m, Elliott led the battalion's second wave into the attack. According to one witness, Major Elliott dropped about 80 yards from our line. Shortly afterwards, he stood up and tried to get his tunic off, then pitched forward onto his face. He remained there, all bunched with his body in the air and his head on the ground as we went past. We did not see him as we came back next morning. This is but one of the many stories of courage and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Major Thomas Patrick Elliott and all of those Australians who have given their lives in service of our nation. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
This memorial can feel like a deep well of sadness, full of lives cut short or broken beyond repair. But look closer, and there's more here. Between 1914 and 1918, in France and elsewhere, we made for ourselves some of the worst times and places imaginable. And yet, even in such places, surrounded by horror and fear, some men devoted their last moments not to themselves, but to their friends. And that's love. The love might not survive them, but it was the last thing they would lose. And for me, the realization that in such places, love between friends and for friends was there at the end is beautiful. And so as well as all the death and the loss and the horror, it's friendship and love that will be remembered here and for all time.